Stuck inside my mind in this quarantine house. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't inside. Where do I go to find someone to talk to about all of my wants? You can never validate me, tell me the lies. I searched until nothing there and missed online. Said I'm anxious and depressed and my coping skills are not fine. We weren't a fit and it felt like a waste of time. I heard an interview and I felt an instant connection. I learned CAT, BBD and my book skills and teaching every session. I'm going through, ready to ask the next question. The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a donation to the podcast via Venmo to the username @NQCATX. Hello, and welcome to NextQuest podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Today, I welcome to the show Amanda Wallingsford, licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, who will be talking about her practice in an area of interest, understanding our survival strategies. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So tell us, what are your credentials and experience?
I am, as you said, licensed marriage and family therapist and board approved supervisor. I have been in the mental health field for going over 20 years now. I went to undergrad and got a degree in human and organizational development with an emphasis in health and human services, and then a major in child and adolescent development. So in college, I started my internship at a runaway shelter, and directly out of college, I went into the community mental health. And one of the supervisors in undergrad said, go get experience before you decide on your licensure. And that was amazing advice. And so then I took about 5 or 6 years off and decided that MFT was the route for me.
Awesome. How long did you do community mental health for?
I did that for 17 years,
Wow.
I think.
That's a long time to be in community mental health.
Yeah, I did that. And then because I had moved to Texas, did 2 more years here. And then I took a break and went to the state and worked for a community health, mental health program for the YES waiver. I don't know if you're aware of that.
YES waiver. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on the state team for that. And then I was like, I'm ready to do private practice. I'm ready to kind of get out of that and be able to dive deeper into therapy. Because I was a program manager for several years in community mental health. I love leadership, but I was like, let me follow my calling and do the private practice. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's so important to have experience in community mental health as a practitioner in order to go into private practice. I think community mental health prepares us for anybody who walks through the door.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that really helped prepare me was all of the contracts I worked for. I was in San Diego, and all of the contracts were juvenile justice prevention or intervention related, but they all had a component requiring family participation. And so I did thousands of home visits, and I don't know what I would do without that experience, because it really helped me understand all the dynamics that are at play. There's one thing to have a client come in, especially a youth. They come into your office. If they're by themselves, you only get one slice
Right.
The pie to understand it, but when you see their family system in play, it's invaluable to the growth we can help them make.
I totally agree. Totally agree. So, Amanda, what is the name of your practice?
My practice is Positive Changes Counseling Services, and
Okay.
I'm doing mostly telehealth, and then I just relocated to Round Rock. I was in Pflugerville and Westlake, and then with COVID and offices changing, it just opened doors in the last couple of weeks to do a few in-person sessions in Round Rock.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's nice to be back in an office.
Yeah.
I mean, just having the separation from the mess at home or the dogs barking, it's been really nice to kind of get back into that feeling of a therapy room.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your practice, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? If not, why not?
Okay, so I accept Blue Cross, all plans. However, I've put in my resignation for the HMO plan.
Okay.
And so that will end, I think, September. And that's really because of it's not very supportive to providing quality treatment. And then I have Medicaid. So I have Medicaid through Superior and Blue Cross. And I'm in process of Dell Children's.
Cool.
I'm waiting to hear back. And then I have Ambetter. Oh, and then I have Sauna. Sauna is not a very well-known one, but it's starting to kind of build in Austin, but I do take Sauna.
Cool.
And then, of course, private pay if it's appropriate, especially for doing EMDR intensives. But the Medicaid, I may think about going more towards letting go of insurance companies, but I will always keep Medicaid to be able to serve that population that can otherwise not access resources.
Right. I appreciate that. And for the Blue Cross Blue Shield HMO plans, it's so hard to find any therapists anywhere on that plan. And it's just because the way they administrate the plan will say isn't adequate.
Yeah, and I really struggled with that because I wanted to be able to stay on so people had access to it. And then after 3 years of being on it and the amount of work that goes into it, and I would rather provide more flexibility to sliding scale than continue to be with an insurance that does not support mental health.
Right.
I know a lot of therapists are struggling with these decisions, but that's kind of where I've arrived at.
Yeah, I'm in the process now. I'll be off of all insurance as of 7/15.
Okay.
It was a hard, very difficult decision to make, but ultimately it was the best one for me and my practice. Do you do all your own billing, or do you have somebody do it for you?
I actually hired a virtual assistant maybe in January, and it's been amazing. She's a college student, has had exposure to medical billing and stuff, and it's been great. So I'm not going through a company, but she's just kind of it takes one thing off of my plate. Of course, I have to handle if there's kind of some issues that come up, but it's been really nice to have that extra support, and she's got a great attitude and helpful. But I started realizing, I mean, it's so much work to do the admin in private practice.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm getting off of insurance partially is I don't want a substantial part of my income to go to paying somebody. A lot of these bigger companies that do billing for you take like certain percentages of whatever it is you get paid. And that's just a little scary, giving away a percentage of your income. So I was doing it all myself, and I've been working 60+ hour weeks for the last at least 3 years. Well, I mean, technically, I've been working 60-hour plus weeks since 2012, but but since I've been in private practice, I've been doing that for the last 3 years, and I just realized it doesn't have to be that way, you know?
Yes. Yeah, and I wonder if coming from community mental health, we're used to having like just so much on our plate and then get to private practice and we think, oh, okay, it's going to get easier, but there's a lot that goes into running a business.
Absolutely.
And yeah, reaching a point where it doesn't have to be that hard. I lucked out with this virtual assistant because I'm not paying big overhead or anything. And it was just, it was almost like the stars aligned because I was thinking of it. And then this person said, hey, I'm looking for a part-time job and I've worked in healthcare. So I'm not giving away too much. It's enough. It's
worth it.
It is totally worth it just to know it's being taken care of. And when I go to sleep at night, I'm not worrying about the 5 denials I got back that I have to go investigate and sit on a phone call for an hour and not get a live person.
Right. At least an hour.
So,
yeah. Okay. So you said you do you have a sliding scale or reduced fee that you offer?
Yeah, so it's actually a reduced fee. My hourly fee is $130. I reduce it to $100, and then that's where, you know, as I'm kind of business planning in the next year, I really want to be able to create a sliding scale structure.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got to put some components in place.
That's cool. Do you have weekend or evening appointments available?
I don't have weekend. I have set very good boundaries around not working on the weekends. But my evening slots have been full for ever.
Yep.
So it's very rare when something comes up and it's more like a cancellation. But as far as ongoing, I mean, I offer evening, but they're already taken.
Got it. Okay. Is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was?
So the case manager was the first career. It's the same career, but that was the first major role. And then going into supervision of mental health programs. But yeah, this has been my calling ever since I started working.
Awesome. What drew you to being a therapist? Like how and when did you know?
So yeah, this is going to open the doors to kind of get into some deeper stuff. I knew around the age of 12. I was so excited. I volunteered in the counseling office, but at that age, I started noticing now having words for it, I started noticing trauma in systems and especially oppressive systems and how I started seeing these patterns. And so I became very curious about it. So most of that came from my family. Had a biological dad that I could see his family is Hispanic. So I'm half Hispanic and half white. And I could see this contrast between his family and his challenges and lack of access to resources and the mental health that came from that versus being in the home with my mom and adoptive parents. Although I also recognize some generational trauma and some family dynamics. I was so curious, why do people become the way they do? I also lived in I went to a school that had different socioeconomic things, and I started seeing these patterns of people getting in trouble. What were those patterns? Demographics and everything, and the people that were, I guess, checking all the societal boxes of doing well. And then I guess more specifically, my dad, I knew he was in a lot of pain. I didn't know it was depression at the time. But I wanted to be able to help people not experience that pain.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just my calling, and I've followed it ever since.
That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, like your hobbies, interests, TV shows you're watching, music, pets, kids, etc.
Okay. So family structure, I am married, been married for 4 years. I don't know. I met him later in life, and I swear it was worth the wait. Just my maturity, his maturity. And so he has a daughter, a 12-year-old, that we have 50% of the time, very regular schedule, co-parent with the mom. He also has, I think he just turned 22. He has a 22-year-old son who has a child now. So I am a grandparent.
Wow.
It's very weird. And then I also have a son, but he's in heaven already. I had him last year, and he was 3 months old. He had a severe medical condition that unfortunately was not compatible with life. And so he passed away a little over a year ago, but he's my son, and he's in my spirit realm in heaven. And it's beautiful to be a mom, even though he's not here. And then we have 2 dogs, German Shepherd and Black Lab. As far as interests, I have a bad habit of binge watching shows, so I can't start a new show at like 11 at night, because then I won't go to bed. But I've binge watched Schitt's Creek, 13 Reasons Why, and then I always get into suspense and crime shows. I love trying to figure out who the killer was in the show.
I'm a sucker for true crime.
Yeah, I heard that on another podcast.
Yeah.
So I know some people are like, how do you watch that? And it's like, somehow it's a break from what we deal with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, maybe if I worked in like criminal justice, I wouldn't be as willing to watch it, but there's just something about it that's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of the summary, love being outside, swimming, dancing.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear about your son. That must have been very difficult, especially in the context of a pandemic. I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. He was diagnosed, it's called Noonan Syndrome, and he was diagnosed 19 weeks in utero. Before that, they did not think he would survive because of some symptoms he was having, and they really didn't think he would survive till birth. And he did. So it was beautiful. And then with it, there's a whole range of Noonan syndrome. Some people do fine, don't even know they have it, and some people don't. The major thing is heart defects and lymphatic system not working. And so unfortunately, his little body, the lymphatic system didn't work. And so it's a double-edged sword. So blessed to have had him when we were told we wouldn't. And then, heartbreaking to lose him. So, but it's a part of my journey now, and kind of integrate it into becoming who I am because of it.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure there's other people out there that, need to hear that even therapists go through stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So going back to like the topic here, our topic is understanding our survival strategies, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you have some really good ones, so you're a good person to talk about with this with. So what are survival strategies? Where do they come from? What does that look like? Kind of give us a definition.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons I went ahead and mentioned my son, one is to honor him when somebody asks about who your family is, but it's been a very interesting journey to have gone through that. And I had gone through some major hardships and tragedies earlier in my life. And then going through this, and there has been this kind of centeredness that I didn't have 20 years ago. And so I started thinking about what's different about me this time around. And so started thinking about I actually started writing a book trying to kind of figure out these things. And and one of them, the big thing that sticks out is survival strategies, which are the ways that we develop, and most often as children, that we develop these patterns to get through life, and particularly hardships. And there's, for a long time, and in many situations, they serve us. But then there becomes a point when they don't serve us. And so, like in my journey, kind of looking at, all of a sudden, I had my survival strategies staring at me. I started, getting really creative, and I wanted to delve into this and that. And my mom was like, hello, you're doing what you do. You're getting really busy. And trying to figure out, is busy going to work for me right now?
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I've seen for years, and I've talked to and worked with clients through about survival strategies, that these patterns that come into play and they get conditioned. And so often they get conditioned before the brain is developed. So there's not as much awareness as to why we do it. And then they come in, and so often they judge themselves for it and they shame themselves for it. So an example is somebody the other day mentioned, God, why can't I just turn my brain off? I analyze everything all the time. I'm always looking for problems. Well, if we dig back to where that started, it was a survival strategy to be on alert status because the environment was unpredictable. And so, I think it's important to look at survival strategies to see how they serve us, because so often we judge them and shame them and say, I just don't want to be this way. And so if we look at how they serve us and how maybe they're backfiring, is kind of what I call it, is we can find what works now in life.
Right.
What best serves for the situation now.
So some other examples of like some survival strategies would include things like, I know you mentioned being like overly busy is definitely one, and like perfectionism and like a sense of fierce independence.
Yes.
What other strategies can you give us that people that commonly develop?
Yeah. Actually created a list when I was writing the chapter in the book. People pleasing, and I know that is, and fawning, and I know that is now kind of considered a trauma response and within the fight, flight, or freeze. But the fawning or the people pleasing is letting go of your own needs, acquiescing them, giving them over to the other person. And from a survival response, I can think of so many situations where that was what kept them safe. If they were to exert a boundary and a voice at the time, it might have brought harm. And so, but then it creates this pattern of an internal belief system of my needs don't matter.
Right.
And so, being able to grow into my needs do matter, but at the time it kept me safe. So yeah, keeping busy, overworking, not slowing down to be able to not slowing down to feel emotions. I can think of maybe, for example, somebody who was living as a teenager in a home with violence, and they started their pattern of being busy all the time at school. High achiever, straight A's, clubs, and everything, which brings a lot of good. They build resources, but then when it comes down to slowing down, they're very uncomfortable. And in high school, in that example, they may not have had room to slow down to actually feel that stuff. But then when we get older and all of our emotions are like, hi, I'm here.
Right.
You've tried to ignore me, but I'm here. And they start coming out in other ways. It's recognizing that survival strategy helped keep going. And yet we're now at a point that the emotions in the body are saying, hey, I need attention too.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's unfortunate that a lot of those types of strategies are also reinforced by our society by things like capitalism, for example.
Uh-huh.
And that winds up like reinforcing that strategy over time until, like you said, those emotions just like build up. Those emotions have been bottled up for so long, and then people start having problems.
Yeah, that makes me think of one that really was highlighted when I lost my son, or even when I was pregnant and then had him, is this societal message of just stay positive. So that toxic positivity.
Right.
And there is a time and place when looking for the positive does help. You don't want to be in a puddle every day. But then this cultural reinforcement of just be positive, don't even acknowledge the negative. Well, where does the pain go that us as humans naturally are going to experience? And so I hear in people, well, why can't I just appreciate what I have? Or why can't I just get over it and stop crying? Because there's that cultural, societal message of stay positive. So I talk about that a lot with clients, talking about those societal messages. I think about in my grief process too, and people are well intended, but just look at the bright side, look at how beautiful it is. Well, that's true. It is beautiful. And that's something I imagine you also say with clients, and there's intense despair going on here.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, like when I approach clients in working with their thinking, right? Because I do incorporate some cognitive behavioral stuff into my work with people. I always tell people, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I tell people like, I am not going to ask you to think in an overly positive manner, because to me, that's just as unbalanced as thinking in an overly negative manner. So what we focus on instead is just balancing out that thinking as a whole.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you there. You do incorporate CBT as well, and I do the same thing. And we look at what's actually true, that and state what's true on both ends. I did have a good day, and underneath, I'm really struggling. And so teaching them to just be, or not teaching them, but also giving permission to, we can be real with that. And because I don't really believe in, some people affirmations work, but if we tell ourselves lies, I remember a therapist saying, you can't bullshit yourself.
Right.
Sorry, I don't know if I can say that on here.
Oh, you can totally cuss on here. That's totally okay.
But he's like, yeah, go ahead and tell yourself you're beautiful in the mirror, but you're bullshitting yourself. So what is true? I find beauty in my eyes or something, and so I'm similar to you as finding the real stuff instead of what we think we should say, which is another, cognitive distortion. These shoulds, and all shoulds do are shame us.
Right. Stop shitting yourself. But yeah, what you were talking about essentially reminds me of the phrase holding the dialectic, which is the ability to hold two opposing ideas as being true at the same time, right? So, for example, that somebody can be both good and bad, that we can feel both good and bad.
Yeah, I have not heard of that term before, but I love that. Yeah, to be able to hold good and bad and anything in between.
So, tell us a little more about how trauma impacts our survival strategies. How how might, for example, somebody develop a survival strategy that's helpful and then hurtful later down the line? Can you give us some examples of what that might look like? And like also how our childhood influences those survival strategies, because we all have them in some way, shape, or form.
We do. Yeah. We all have them. It's because, I mean, as nice it would be, I don't know that there is a perfect family unit or family situation, whoever's included in that, caretaking situation, that we're not perfect. So we're going to respond to our parents in the, in the circumstances, the best we can with limited knowledge. When I think of trauma, and that is something that I was very blessed. The agency I was with in San Diego was trauma informed, way before trauma informed became a thing. And so I never take off the trauma lens. And so that lens, I'm looking at what is your worldview? What is your view of yourself? And so to answer your question, what it makes me think of is if we go back to a child who's living, has experienced trauma, or living in a situation that's, I think the biggest thing is not feeling safe, not having security, whether it's secure attachment or security in surroundings, to know that what they need is important, that their needs are going to be met, whether it's basic, whether it's food, whether it's I'm not going to be hit today, like my actual physical being is not going to be injured today. And so in kind of thinking of examples, a big one is that hypervigilance that starts is to, the body, as I know you're very trauma informed, the body and the mind is designed to detect danger. And so hypervigilance of being able to detect surroundings. I'm thinking of somebody who, and this has happened several times, but somebody recently where they constantly theorize what the other person is thinking. Right. And they don't have evidence for it. Right. Well, that stems from childhood of having somebody or many people in their life where it's so unpredictable that they had to be prepared for when this, let's say, parent walks through the door, they have to know what mood are they going to be in.
Right.
Because if I don't know what mood I'm in, I don't know how to best protect myself. They have to really pay attention to the intricacies, the nonverbals, because those are indicators. What do I do to protect myself now to prevent less harm?
Right.
One example, that's helpful or not.
Yeah, one example that specifically comes to mind in thinking about this are like people who grow up with a parent who is an alcoholic, for example, and they wind up taking this caretaker role, even as a child, of the parent who is an alcoholic. And for a lot of people, what that kind of may result in is like significant codependency, right? Like people pleasing, like still even upon being a grown up and still caretaking for that parent in some ways, and enmeshment in relationships. And really people pleasing is what I see the most. And it's very difficult for people to put themselves first and to recognize that they don't have to please anybody, and that same danger isn't present anymore.
Yeah. But it's so subconscious, and so ingrained in the body. But that's a great example. And I can think of the other day talking to somebody about they had to caretake at that young age because otherwise their needs wouldn't be met.
Right.
And the dynamic of the parent bringing that into that dynamic. But that there were times, that I've heard it with a lot of clients. I couldn't let my mom break down, because if she broke down, she'd not feed me, you know?
Right.
And so turning into being that parentified thing, and then they grow up, and like one of the conversations the other day was, I'm afraid that they can't handle it because they had evidence that somebody couldn't handle it. And so they developed that trait, that pattern, that I'm just going to go ahead and, like you said, codependency, I'm going to go ahead and take care of it for them. Because if I don't, there's that internal fear of what will happen. And like you said, it's not unsafe now. So that other person might actually be more resourceful and, compared to the parent 20, 30 years ago. But that internal wiring of, I've got to take care of this because I can't rely on somebody else to do it. That's kind of the deeper part.
Right. And, I read this thing earlier. It basically said, if you don't address your childhood traumas, your romantic relationships will. And I think that is so true. And oftentimes the reason why a lot of people end up in therapy, in their early 20s, for example, because, my relationships just aren't working, things, and I don't know what's going on. And I think that's a catalyst for a lot of people to get into therapy.
Yeah, I agree. Something happened something happened the other day with my husband. I'm not going to divulge too much because I'm sure he wouldn't appreciate that. But it was this mirroring of my pattern of needing to control. And for him, he didn't understand it. And, and so thankfully we worked through it really well. But all of a sudden I saw my pattern in front of me of, because of the things that I couldn't control in my life, I have developed a pattern of, well, then I'm going to make sure everything I do is right. Like it's done the right way. I'm not going to leave room for error, because if there's error, that means maybe something bad could happen. And, I've been aware of this. I've been I've been doing therapy for all my life. But it was like this pattern staring in front of me, and we happened to be sitting at the cemetery. We were about to get out of the car, and I said, because if I let go of control and I don't plan everything perfectly, I lose people. So that was really good material for therapy the next day.
Yeah, totally.
But then I joked with my mom, and I was like, Mom, I thought I was going to be done growing with these patterns. I thought there was going to be a day that they just stop. But I've been able to find humor. It's like, oh, there it is again. Yeah. My childhood trauma just coming in a different form. And thankfully in a more progressed, form, that I'm doing better and being able to recognize it. But yeah, if we don't recognize those, they show up in our lives again. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this conversation, and why I do it with clients, is because if you move towards those patterns with compassion and curiosity, rather than judgment and shame, we can learn to work with them. And that's where, internal family systems comes in. I'm not trained in it, so I really don't want to proclaim that I am, but I know some of the basic concepts of befriending those parts, that part of you that shows up when it's scared, when it's feeling out of control, and getting to know that so that we can find strategies that work a little bit better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So those parts of us are protective parts.
Yeah. And seeing them through the lens of protection, I think it can be really freeing.
I agree.
There's this horrible part of me that when this shows up, I'm a broken and I'm horrible. And that's why if we can look at, wait, how has it tried to protect you? And how has it worked? Let's honor that it has worked. Then we're moving to be with it and work with it rather than against it.
So how do we go about normalizing and validating those survival strategies, those protective parts of us. Like what's your approach to that with clients?
It's a great question.
Because shame is so hard to, hard to overcome. It's huge.
Yeah. A big approach, a common approach I use is taking them back to, so they verbalize, I have this behavior. And I take them back. I invite them to go back and remember a time or a situation when they were younger, and to see it through that lens. And sometimes it's easier for them to see it through a lens of another child. Like the other day, somebody was able to reflect, they were watching a 2-year-old. Oh, I see why this 2-year-old did this,
Mm-hmm.
So taking them back to see their worldview from that point and say, what did you need to do to survive? Well, I had to stay quiet. I had to take my mom. I had to make mom dinner when she said, I had to jump when she said jump, or, dad or whatever. And so helping them see, because we as we as we grow each day, we don't see our world from the lens from back then. We see it from present time because we're so close to it. And so helping take them back and go, let's remember what it was like to be that little person
Mm-hmm.
at that time and what you were going through on a daily basis. And so I'll ask them, what was life like? What were your challenges in the day? Things like that.
Yeah, and I think it brings up some additional points of IFS, which I'm not trained in either, but the theory, I suppose, does inform my work.
Mm-hmm.
Those being able to, the way I think about it is, we have our traumas and we have various parts of ourselves that may even be there's parts of us that show up in our adult life from our upbringing, right? And throughout our life. So say somebody experienced significant trauma at the age of 5 or 6 years old. Sometimes when something, a trigger of sorts comes up that triggers trauma in some way for that person, they may respond from the place of that 5-year-old part of themselves, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's what happened, I think, the other day.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was all of a sudden, my body felt this intense fear. And it was something we were swimming with my stepdaughter, and my body felt the fear. And so I went into control mode. I went into, okay, how can I control everything? And my husband's not understanding, why do we need to have all of this in order? And so, I realized, whoa, this wasn't just about, 30 minutes ago. This was my body was going back to these other times that were really painful. And I was very fearful because there wasn't any control in this situation. And so helping clients see that too. So that is something that I integrate. There's a lot of, I'm not somatic trained from the somatic experiencing, but I am trained in trauma conscious yoga, the trauma conscious yoga from Natita, and then some somatic stuff, and then EMDR, I think, really helps us kind of help the client become aware of what is that energy in the body, where is it held, how old is it, what does it remind you of, because we're holding these layers of experiences.
And the reason why I think those younger traumatized parts of ourselves come up are because that part of us has some pretty significant unmet needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you might go about this, but one thing I like to do, for example, is to have my clients connect with that younger self and one strategy that I've used that's been really helpful for a lot of folks has been, even writing a letter to that younger part of yourself and giving that part of you what is missing. Like, what did you need to hear at that age? What did you need from an adult? And that's so healing for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. The letter, and because their needs got squashed. I mean, they weren't taught that they had the right to have the needs, and they weren't taught what needs were. EMDR, I think, lends well to when we're processing trauma, and some of the resourcing techniques there is we can invite in that nurturing towards the younger self in that memory. And that's done very skillfully. But it's been very profound when all of a sudden, people are, the clients are going, oh my God, the hug that I just gave myself, the love that I just gave myself or told myself it wasn't my fault, can be really transformative. And without, it'd be the letters, it'd be the conversations,
Yeah, totally. And of course, one letter, it doesn't just cure everything, but it gets the ball rolling, right?
Yeah. And recognizing there is that little person, that little part in you that lived a very real experience, a very valid, I can't think of the word, I just lost it, but just very valid experience that needs to be honored. And the longer we don't honor those pains and those struggles that we went through, the more they decide to pop up later.
Right. And I think, and building that self-compassion, I think, is what it's all about. Because most people aren't taught how to do that.
Exactly.
We're taught to feel guilt when we're not as productive as we wanted to be, for example. Which I think shows like the patterns of how we, rather than be compassionate toward, patterns of how we shame and criticize those parts of us.
Yeah, that we're taught, and we see it on, messages on magazine stands when you're standing in the grocery of, basically the implied messages, 10 ways to be happy, for example. Well, therefore, something's wrong with me because I can't be happy. Because clearly it's easy. If you can list it out in 10 techniques and I'm not happy, then something's wrong with me,
Right. And that's right. That's like assuming that happiness is like a state of being,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was one of the questions I read. I don't believe in happiness as a consistent thing. I see it as a very temporary thing. And so I try to help, I guess, what has helped me. And then I see if it fits clients. I don't like to try to tell them what's going to fit for them, but what fits for me. I remember years I struggled with a lot of depression because of some of the things I went through. And I just kept thinking, why can't I be happy? And then I realized that's a temporary state. So I've shifted it to being peaceful. And I find this kind of baseline level of peace that even if there's a good day, I enjoy it. And if there's a bad day, I still have some, I don't even know if peace is the right word right now, because I've definitely felt it with losing Ashton. Some sense of comfort that I'm still okay. I'm still okay. And I can go ahead and I can endure and hope and be resilient with the ebbs and flows. But if we hold ourselves to this standard that we must be happy all the time, I think it's setting us up for disappointment.
Totally agree with that. So you've described a few different modalities that you draw upon. What, like, just as a whole, what modalities would you say you work with or within?
Yeah, I mean, one that's a staple is the cognitive behavior therapy, recognizing our thoughts and finding practical ways we can start listening to how we talk to ourselves. I guess I should say in my modalities as being a client and seeing when they fit well. And my first chunk was hearing how I talk to myself and hearing the evidence that I would pull that actually didn't exist. Like, I don't know, everybody hates me. Well, does that match the evidence?
Right.
You've got 5 friends that called and checked on you yesterday or something, you know? And then I come from an attachment lens, looking at secure attachment, and whether we had it in childhood or don't, and then how we build it in our present day relationships and with ourselves, that secure attachment with ourselves. I'm very family systems focused as well. And so attachment, I think family systems theory are kind of my underlying lens of how I see growth and change. And then the interventions are going to be more of the CBT, EMDR, the somatic interventions, you know, with the trauma conscious yoga.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool.
Yeah, I use my intuition. I use my knowledge, but I use my intuition too to see kind of where maybe the focus is best for the client at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, before we move on to the next portion of questions, was there anything else that you wanted to say about our survival strategies that we didn't talk about or I didn't ask about?
No, I think we talked about it, but just maybe kind of to repeat it is I encourage people to get to know, have that compassion, get to know those parts and see them through that lens of wanting to protect, and, you know, and that's underneath trauma. That's what our body's trying to do, is always trying to protect us. I mean, that's not something we chose. The brain's literally saying, how do I protect myself?
Mm-hmm.
And so getting to know that and spending time to see how it's really had good intentions. Those parts have had really good intentions. And that when they work too, we want to look at when they have worked. And then look and see, does that meet what I need right now? Do I need that same protection right now? Or do I actually have other resources within me that can fill this underlying emotion or desire a little better, that the strategy is a little better?
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, I had a lot of fun talking about that with you, but we will go on to the next portion. So this section focuses more on you as a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
Yeah. No, my mind just thought of a couple different things. So, okay, I'm going with my body telling me this right now is I really want to stay up front. I present as white, and I've lived from a privileged space of that whiteness. And so no matter what I kind of mentioned as far as my experience is that I do always keep my privilege at the forefront of my mind and recognize it, to honor it, and see how that may create a gap of me understanding where somebody else has come from. At the same time, I, you know, because as I mentioned, you know, my dad being Hispanic, and starting to notice how cultural differences kind of started, you know, intersect with things, and socioeconomic, he definitely struggled socioeconomically, is that I started learning about diversity. I had to have been middle school. I started trying to read books and things like that. And so from an educational lens, I actually chose San Diego State University for my grad school program, because that is like their top value, is to see everything from a cultural lens, and teach us. It was actually a 3-year program instead of 2 years, whereas a lot of hands-on, nitty gritty. Let's look at all of our racial biases, you know, all of any biases, and I chose that program because it aligned with my values to always be able to serve in the best way I can with my capacity from my lived experience. And then as far as training, so I have the grad school, and then as far as training, I've done 3 40-hour curriculums on cultural responsiveness. And one of them was right before I left San Diego, and that focused on LGBTQ youth. Others focused on kind of more broadly the different cultural categories. And then as far as professional experience, I actually worked in San Diego. My office, I am bilingual, and so my office and my clientele was half a mile from the border.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so 14 of my years was working with Mexican American youth and families. And I say that I had done one of my grad school research projects was how do they identify themselves. And so using that word, that was the common word, was Mexican American, having those two cultural components. I feel so blessed that that just made me think of something else that's important to say. I feel blessed that is part of my real life experience. My biological father's family, my grandparents are Spanish speakers, but they didn't teach their children. So that's why I wanted to get back to my own heritage and learn Spanish. So it's kind of, I don't want to claim that that's how I was raised, but it is kind of part of who I am, of getting to that cultural connection of the Hispanic heritage. And then I've continued, that's why I take Medicaid, is to be able to serve underprivileged populations, marginalized populations, as, that is kind of the access to resources that they have.
Right.
And then as far as LGBTQ and trans, I was thinking about this. My first trans client in private practice, they called and they said, I'm trans. And I said, I want to be honest. I don't specialize in this. I am absolutely open to it, but I don't specialize. And my client said, awesome, that's what I want. They said, that from their past experiences, because they were like, I feel really solid in my gender identity, and I want to work on my trauma. And so it's been kind of more organic. I've been trained from this academic lens, but now I have several trans clients on my caseload, but I really don't want to claim that that's my specialty. But I really do see, and I'm open to anybody, because I want to just meet them where their experience is at. But also recognize my limitations and have that upfront conversation. What are you wanting from a therapist in regards to this? And be upfront whether or not I have that experience.
Right. Okay. What could a new client...
Long-winded answer, huh?
No, I think that was a good answer. I think it sums up your experience, and it sounds like you have a variety of different experiences. So I'm glad to hear that. What could a new client expect from an initial session with you? And what about on an ongoing basis? When people are looking for a therapist, they get nervous and they don't know what to expect. So what would they expect from you in the first and ongoing sessions?
So I know people do this differently, but I do free consultation calls, 20, 30 minutes. I believe very strongly, and I guess maybe this came from the community mental health, is to establish that rapport from the get-go and create safety for them to come in, and create choice of getting a feel of, am I the right fit for them? Are they the right fit for me? And so the rapport is established on the phone. And I explain, I always ask, what's your history with therapy? And say, oh yeah, I've been there before. Here's what I like. Or somebody's like, I have never been, I don't know what to expect. So I tried to explain the therapeutic process and explain my approach, which is very similar to kind of how our conversation is. I'm open, I'm authentic. I tell clients that first session or on the phone that absolutely no matter what, I want them to feel comfortable with their therapist, and that it's okay if they don't feel that it's a good fit. Know how firsthand, if the relationship's not there, it doesn't matter how magnificent the therapist is, trained in some model. And so in my first session, I'm going to ask questions. I'll have a little bit of information from the consultation, but I'm going to ask questions. I'm not very formal. As far as, I don't follow like a script or anything, but letting them show up and tell me what they want to tell me about who they are. And I guess I really try to let them know that this is their space. Like, this is their time. They don't have to take care of me. They don't have to take care of anybody else. And I'm going to meet them where they're at. And then I also like it to really be collaborative. And I explain that, that my approach is they are, for lack of a better term, expert in their own lives. I have a set of tools that could enhance the situation, but it doesn't mean they're going to be the right tools, and that they will get voice and choice in the process. But then I'm also going to be honest. So I let them know I use humor sometimes, actually a lot probably. And then also am assertive and direct with things.
That's awesome. I'm very direct myself. All my clients know that, and they say that's why they come to me. So
Yeah.
a lot of people appreciate that
Mm-hmm.
directness rather than somebody who is more passive in session.
Yeah. I tell them, I said, I will always be honest with you. You will never have to guess what I'm thinking. What I promise to you is I'm going to show up honestly and authentically. And if you have a question, I'm going to be honest with it, because I don't want the responsibility on them to play out another relationship where they're having to be on guard for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How would you say your clients would describe or experience you?
I think kind of it's that other side. They feel safe. They feel seen. We build a trust that I'm looking out for their best interest, and I'm going to be honest. It's trying to create that secure attachment model, model that of it's safe to mess up with me. That's kind of a broad term. I don't have the specifics, but I'm still going to care. I'm going to be honest if I see, whoa, that, that's where I use my humor. Like, well, that was an interesting strategy. How'd that work out for you? And have some gentleness, but that my commitment to them and my care for them is not going to change based on the choices they make, and I normalize things. Like, we don't always make the best choices, even if maybe in our head we know it's not a great choice. And so meeting them where they're really at. And I've got clients since I've been in private practice. I've got some clients that have been there from the beginning, going on 3.5 years with some breaks.
Yeah.
It's not like I just keep them in there forever for my benefit. But that the relationship is solid and consistent and reliable.
Cool. Okay. Are you a therapist who will, it sounds like you'll laugh. Are you a therapist who will laugh or cry with your clients?
I am. I don't cry as much anymore. And that's not because I'm afraid to let it. I just don't. Things don't get to me as much, maybe. But I believe in being authentic. And I guess what I think is, if I sit there and I tear up.
I've gotten all sorts of answers for this.
Yeah, no, and I'm not even looking for the right answer. I'm kind of trying to visualize I use my words. I try to balance, like, I let them know, wow, that's really touching, and I'm here with you. But I also try to balance, like, it's not about me. Like, you don't have to take care of me,
Right.
But there are moments and I'm okay with it. I just, I believe, I think there are good boundaries to have in therapy, but I think that there's so much healing that can be happened in the moment of rawness.
Right. To me, that's my favorite part of therapy.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. That's why maybe it's hard to describe, because it's this energy in that moment.
Right.
And if I were to sit there and be stoic, I think we're missing out on humanness and connection.
Well, connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I also, that's why I go to therapy, is to make sure that it's not about me.
Right.
And then we create that dynamic of taking care of me. So as an example, I'm not ready to take a client that has lost a child.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm still processing so much, and that's not fair to a client. And if I cried, if they come in and tell me the story, I'm going to be crying for me as well. That's not fair to them,
Right.
But so just knowing kind of our own stuff. But absolutely, I believe in the power of human connection, and I'm going to be there to live with that with the clients.
Cool. How do you define holding space for someone? This is probably my favorite question.
Yeah.
Because it like sums up everything we do, like a lot, at least the basis of what we should be doing is holding space, right? And it's just this nebulous kind of concept. But I love that everybody, we say different things, but we all mean the same thing too. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, because I think it is a great question, I think the first thing, holding space, is presence, like being fully present and letting them know I am here to, I don't want to use the term again, but I'm here to hold space for whatever you want right now. Letting them know that they are important and that they're not going to be judged, that it is their time. I mean, think of how often we are programmed that, oh, I shouldn't take up space. There's not time for it. Somebody can't handle it. I've heard lots of times people talking about whether it's their trauma or their loss. Well, I don't tell people because they can't handle it. It's too much. And so as a therapist, doing self-care on our end so that we can be, when that person comes into our session, video in the room, it is their time, and that we have the capacity to hear and hold whatever they bring up.
Yeah, love it. Well said. What is the best advice you've ever received from a supervisor?
When I was thinking about, honestly, it's slow down the process. Slow it down. It is nerve-wracking to be a therapist when you're new. And there's like this, there's this expectation I should know how to handle this. And yet like a computer, if you're working on a computer, you only have a finite number of problems with the computer. It's the outlet, it's the keyboard. Humans, like, there's no end. And so there's this kind of, there can be this anxiety when we start as to, oh my gosh, can I handle it? What if they say this? Am I saying the right thing? And the advice was slow it down, where you're not feeling like you have to fix it, but you're getting to those deeper levels. Be able to be okay with silence, slowing it down where somebody's really going inside, because we're all already used to just kind of being in our cognitive space and things that, kind of like reading like a story, but slowing it down to help them go, how does this really feel inside, as an example. So that's been something that I've always thought of. And then I teach my interns, my associates, it's okay to slow it down. That's where the humanity is and the vulnerability.
Right. What have you personally learned about yourself and or the world through your practice?
A million things. I consider, so there was something I had to write a bio for myself. And honestly, I consider my life experience one of my biggest teachers. And part of that experience is being a therapist. And what I've learned about myself and the world, I think we just want to live our best selves. I think there's this deeper part that we want to be loved and we want to love others, and we develop these patterns outside of ourselves that kind of get disconnected, and we're just trying our best. I think of working with parents, and so parents come in and they're, maybe harping on something their kid does. What's really happening is they want to protect their kid, or there's shame around what they've done. And so getting deeper, not just for clients, but even for me, what's the shame around this? What are we carrying around? And so learning that there's just this innocence underneath that's just trying to navigate the world and be the best we can be. And so having that compassion for myself as well, and then other people. I've learned that, yeah, as I mentioned before, our shit comes out in new ways. Hopefully each time it does, but it's, that we're just, we're a continuous work in progress. And when I work with a lot of 20 somethings, I love working with that age. And there's so much societal messages that when I reach this, I'm going to have arrived.
Or that I should reach this by this time, even.
Yeah, those timelines, man. And I remember having them, but it's just so prominent. And well, because I'm about to turn 30 and I don't have this and I don't have that. Where did we get these messages? And to realize, wow, even when we get to that point, there's still going to be more to learn and experience. And the best we can do is go along with the ride with gentleness and compassion for ourselves, for other people.
Totally agreed. So after a long, hard day at work in session, what do you do to take care of yourself?
The first thing I learned years ago, especially in case management, is to set boundaries. Not that I've been great about it, but I'm very good about it now, but set boundaries around work schedule. So I absolutely do not schedule things on the weekends. I also have a separate work phone and I put that away. So that, whether it's Google Voice or something coming in, that if somebody texts at 11 at night, I just turn it off, knowing I will have more capacity to be present for somebody. But if I spread it over 24/7, I've got less capacity.
Right.
I have, it's been really interesting in the last year. I put in a lot of, sorry, I just jumped around. I put in a lot of coping skills, dancing, going for hikes, things like that. But the thing I've been working on in the last year and committed myself to was just listening to my body. Is my body telling me I'm tired right now? And then honoring that. Am I hungry right now? Okay. Trying to eat or whatever, that's been a way that has been really good to take care of myself. And then I'm an introvert. So I need a lot of alone time.
Same.
And especially spending energy all day. We're in a job that we are literally in an energy force every appointment. And so, like I said, combining that with listening to my body, that I will set aside alone time. And thankfully, my family is really understanding of it and whatnot. But if I don't recharge my battery, I'm worthless a couple days later. So
right. Yeah. Okay. Well, this next question is a little vulnerable. What is the most embarrassing moment you've had as a clinician?
I am a person who doesn't remember embarrassing moments, except for one. I remember one in college that was pretty funny. I fell through like the stadium seating, like the seats go up. Like I
Yeah.
tried to climb over and I fell through it instead of.
Oh no.
That was pretty funny because the whole classroom turned at me. But I can't think of embarrassing things with clients because embarrassing things, honestly, they just roll off me because I think they're funny.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, in high school, I would get embarrassed for things, but I'm not thinking of something specific. I do know a couple weeks ago, this was embarrassing, but not in a funny way. Um, First appointment I was supposed to have in the office, scheduled it, was supposed to meet somebody in the office, and I completely forgot. So they're like, "Hi, I'm here." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm still at home." Because just transitioning, like I completely forgot. That's embarrassing to me, but thankfully there's a rapport and, they understood my humanness and my mistake too.
Right.
But, as far as other kind of funny things, I don't know. I'll get back to you one day when like a memory pops up and it's like, oh my gosh, that was mortifying.
That sounds good. And the next question you've essentially already answered, but I'm going to ask anyway. Are you in therapy or have you ever been in therapy?
Yeah, I started going to therapy in college. Um, had gotten very depressed. I had unfortunately lost my father to my biological father, not my adoptive father, to suicide. And that just catapulted me into PTSD and depression. And so that's when I started going to therapy. And then I've been in therapy. So that was at age 20 that I started. So I've been in therapy 22 years on and off. There's been times I've taken a break or like when I moved to Texas, I definitely had a break, but I've actually seen 3 different therapists since losing Ashton because there's different needs that came up.
Mhm.
And so like, now I'm with somebody that's very somatic focused, figuring out where I'm holding kind of the trauma of all that. I can't see myself ever not going to therapy because I like to understand how I operate. And I very much believe that if I'm going to ask a client to do something, I should be doing it myself,
Right.
giving it a try. It's kind of like, I remember a therapist in training saying, "Oh, I don't need therapy." And I thought, well, that's like trying to sell somebody like the world's best vacuum, but you refuse to use that vacuum. You use a different
Right.
vacuum. It just doesn't compute to me.
Right.
So I just, and about finding the right one though, I'm not going to go to therapy just to be in therapy. It's just finding what do I need at this time and what modality would probably help me. And then I learned I mean, I imagine, then you really learn the model from a different lens.
Right.
And then can use it or not
Yeah.
use it if you decide it's not a good model. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think it's so important for therapists, period, to be in therapy. Maybe it doesn't have to be on a regular basis, but even just like checking in every once in a while with a therapist just to make sure we're on the right track and our things aren't coming up in session. I think it's important just for that alone. Nevertheless, us as a whole human.
Yeah. And we deserve our time too. We deserve our person, that's like completely, it's not like we can go talk to our family members, about these situations that come up because that breaks confidentiality.
Right.
But being able to honor that, hey, we deserve somebody to hold space for us as well. We're not the ones that have, we don't have to be the ones that are always giving, that we get to receive as well.
Totally agree with that. 110%. Well, Amanda, is there anything else that you think would be good for a potential client or other therapists to know about you?
Let's see. I think we've covered a lot. I guess anybody is that I'm welcome. I invite that if you have a question, give me a call. I am limited on availability right now. So I don't want to, say that I have all these openings, but, for the right, especially like I want to be able to provide services to maybe do some EMDR intensives, which are the ones that are, just kind of we're digging even more into the targets. So maybe if somebody has a therapist they're already working on the everyday stuff, and the EMDR would be an enhancement. That is an option. But yeah, if anybody has questions, whether it's a client or a therapist, I'd be more than happy to have a dialogue. I do have an opening for 1 or 2 more associates to do supervision.
Cool.
I do like to have that part of my schedule. And then I am expanding into coaching. It's a separate business, but I am developing a group coaching program that somebody could reach out to me for if they wanted. And that is going to be focused on self-esteem, not from healing trauma, but living from a place of loving yourself even more fully. Where the actions align with honoring yourself and loving yourself. And then I am writing a book. It's called Embody Your Worth. The goal is to have it done by the end of the year. We'll see how that goes. Because we are in the middle, we're going to be moving soon. So I'm getting behind. But I definitely love helping people build that self-worth. That is definitely the niche that I focus on, which then entails there's some trauma to go through and stuff.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Amanda. It was a real pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and great to talk to you and get to know you, somewhat through this. Finally, I've seen your post and your verbalization of who you are in the community, and it's really great to finally get to have a connection with you.
Same here.
The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Thank you for listening to NextQuest Podcast. I learned something new today, and I hope you did too. NextQuest Podcast will be on a break for the next month, but will return on August 1st with an episode featuring Cindy Cullen, licensed clinical social worker supervisor and certified mental health integrative medicine provider, will be talking about her practice in an area of specialty, integrative psychotherapy. NextQuest Podcast is sponsored by Jan Dimmitt Resources. Save yourself the time and stress of credentialing and let the experts at Jan Dimmitt Resources do what they do best. For over 20 years, Jan Dimmitt Resources has provided administrative support and credentialing services to mental health professionals in Texas and beyond. Visit their website at jandimmitt.com. That is JANDIMMITT.com, or call 512-731-5725 for more information on all the ways they can make running your practice easier for you. NextQuest Podcasts relies solely on donations to keep this project going. Please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/NextQuestPodcast, or you can make a one-time donation on my website at www.nextquestcounseling.com/aboutnextquestpodcast. You can also support the podcast by liking our Facebook page. Until next question, this is Noah Garcia signing off.